I just want to tell you a little poem. It's a very small one, which I picked up just before I went on Terry Wogan's show about 20 years ago. And I read it on Wogan, and people kept writing in trying to find out who had written it. I haven't got a clue who wrote it, but it goes like this. One day when you're feeling important, one day when your ego's in bloom, one day when you have the feeling you're the most important man in the room, take a bucket and fill it with water, put your arm in up to the wrist, pull it out, and the hole that remains there is the measure of how much you'll be missed. And I fear in politics above anything else, that is so true. I mean, it is a fact, and Jean's mentioned it, that actually people will say, well, what's this all about? People lose their jobs every day. People have the trauma, including their families, of not knowing where the next job or the next income is coming from. Is there anything special about us who have been involved in the public arena? And it's the public, it's not just the desire to serve and the loss of the ability to do it, because obviously there are professions where people are serving and where their motivation and where their self-esteem and status comes from what they're doing. Rarely is it in the public eye, and where in other areas it is, you tend to get at least some compensations. Football managers lose their job on a regular basis, but they tend to have other immediate job offers in the same field, and very often they get golden handshakes, and that's certainly true of the FTSE 100 when people move seamlessly out into, Mystique or Barbados at least, for a time, and a time to recover and a time to heal and to get over it. That doesn't exist in the public arena, and whilst we don't expect sympathy for it, I think we do need mechanisms and support systems to enable that to happen more readily, because I think we should be moving in and out of the political arena much more easily. We should be able, at local government as well as at national government, as happens more in Western Europe than it does in the UK, to be able to move in and out and to be welcomed back as well as not rejoiced when we leave. I think we need to find ways of doing that if we're going to refresh and sustain our politics. And of course, the other factor at the moment is the lack of esteem, in fact that's probably a very gentle way of putting it, of politicians in the formal arena, formal political process, those who are seen as the establishment, who are daring to go through the normal processes of decision making, taking on challenges and trying to explain the enormity of those challenges and the difficulties in the real world, in a world of increasing globalization and of decisions that are difficult to take and more difficult to implement, rather than what is happening next Friday in the United States. The way in which that formal, established political process is held in such little esteem. When I stepped down from the cabinet, friends of mine said, welcome back. And I said, what do you mean? And they said, you'd gone. And I said, I hadn't gone. They said, you had. You'd become detached, unable to hold lengthy conversations with us. You were unable to just socialise in the ways that you'd done before. And that came as quite a shock to begin with. And when I reflected on it, of course, it was true. It was life and soul. It was 16 hours a day. My oldest son, who's now 40, when he was 12, when I was transcending from being leader of a major city to an MP, stomped up the stairs one day when I was sat on the bottom step. This was the days when we didn't have mobile phones, on the phone, and he said, you spend more time, Dad, on the phone than you do talking to us. And I did get a shock that day, and I reflected on it and did my utmost, even when I was in cabinet for those 8 years, to spend at least time with my own sons to try and ensure that they didn't think that I'd left them behind. But it was damn difficult. And that's the nature of working at that level and for that length of time. I did think, actually, we should instill sabbaticals. Universities still have them on occasions. My feeling afterwards was that had I gone on a sabbatical, I'd never have come back. John Moore, do you remember someone called John Moore? Yeah, he was going to be the successor to Margaret Thatcher, but he became ill. Charles has bravely talked about, over the years, mental health, and David Owen wrote about mental health and Parliament, and Alistair Campbell's written about it in terms of a different kind of political engagement and the difficulty of adjusting afterwards. Alistair's recent book reflects on that. John Moore never recovered from having to stand down for a few months because of the challenges that he faced. And therefore, we've got to do 2 or 3 things in addition to the very thoughtful analysis that Jane's laid out. We've actually, within the internal political arena, got to start teaching people how to cope with both reaching office and leaving it, and we've got to be able to adjust how we do our politics, not just publicly, so that we get back in touch with people more easily and we can engage in a way that restores the esteem of politics as a profession. But actually, we've also got within the political arena to treat each other a great deal better, and in the ways we preach to others that they should be doing as employers or as trade unions or whatever. So we've got to try and adjust internally to be able to help people through those times of stress, both in and leaving office. I mentioned my own situation. I just wanted to say I think that there are 2 distinct loss of office. One is where you're actually in a position to make policy decisions on a day-to-day basis, leader of a council or a member of a cabinet or a minister. And if you lose both at the same time, as was described by Jane in terms of the Liberal Democrats like Vince Cable and Joe Swinson, if you lost office and your seat at the same time, you had a double whammy, because whilst you may lose office in terms of a reshuffle, being sacked, or in my case deciding to step down in the interests of the government and my sanity, because that's what it was about, you actually at least have a job to go to as a Member of Parliament. If you lose both, you've lost both the decision-making capacity, the enormity of being able to be at that level and change people's lives, and you lose the day-to-day contact, the being there as a Member of Parliament. So that is, I think, the worst possible scenario. Being sacked because people don't think you're up to it anymore, or because your face doesn't fit, because it works both ways. I mean, there are very good people who lost their positions in the reshuffle in this present government last year, who they display how aggrieved they are, don't they, on a regular basis on television and radio, who weren't incompetent but were sacked for other reasons. There are people, and this must be the most dispiriting of all, where something drastic's gone wrong in your department and you lose your position because of that, and that in terms of your own mental and emotional health must be enormous. And then there's people like me who stand down in the glare of massive publicity because something else is going on in your private life, and you've got the whammy of, I talked to Jane about this, you've got the whammy of trying to cope with your private life, in my case, fighting to hold contact with my son, at the same time as losing what you really believed you were doing well in terms of a cabinet position. Now, I did have a job, i.e. I continued to be a Member of Parliament. What saved my sanity was my very closest family and my friends. And had I not had one or both of those, I don't know what would have happened to me. Now, I didn't expect sympathy. and on the whole, I didn't get it. But what I did worry about was the lack of understanding of some colleagues who really ought to have known better. And, you know, the way in which we treat each other has to demonstrate how we want to be treated more broadly. And there's an old adage, I say this all the time when I talk in schools or at the University of Sheffield, treating others as you would want to be treated is a pretty good rule of thumb in life, and we're very, very bad at it as politicians. So we've got to set an example, and then we've got to have mechanisms in place to make it work. And the reason why? Because we want good people to come into politics. We want people to come into local government who know that if they take on being the leader of the council, there will be employers who think that's a really good thing to have done, a learning curve which they can use beneficially in the job offer that they make, and it will be a two-way gain. We don't have that. If you decide to take on becoming an MP, particularly in a marginal seat, mine was a safe seat, you need an understanding that there will be mechanisms and support in terms of employment afterwards for your family, but also to use the skill, as Jane has described and Charles described, the skill you've gained to be able to offer that in new ways, and perhaps to return refreshed and renewed with new vigour, but also with new experiences. The United States are much better at this in terms of moving in and out of academia, in and out of professions and other job opportunities, with the ability to come back. We've got to do it if we want a political environment, a climate where it's a good thing to be a formal politician, but it's a good thing to be able to leave on reasonable terms. And those of us who have been lucky enough to think about how to stand down and how to organise it know that even then it's not easy. When people cry in your local party and ask you to stay, and you've made the decision that you've got to go, it's not easy. I mean, I was damn lucky to have that. Quite often people are giving you the shove rather than actually asking you to stay. There's a book, don't think it's in print now, by Howard Spring called Fame is the Spur. And I read it again recently. And it's a telling story of all sorts of contradictions that we are, as human beings, inclined to engage with, so that it is true that we don't just come in for the best of reasons for public service, which we do. We'd have to be crazy, literally, not to come into politics if you didn't want to make a difference and change the world, because you could earn and gain rewards and have more time and enjoy life a lot better elsewhere. But it's also true that it is in your blood, that it is almost a drug. And once you've been on the public stage and the public arena, it's extremely hard not to want it to continue. And therefore, you've got to adjust, and I think we all need help in coming up to this, to adjust to the fact that, as has been said twice tonight, you're just a normal human being. And Charles, you put it well. You've got to be able to leave and go into anonymity and get a life and get real and enjoy reading a book and listen to poetry and go for a walk and not think, I'm not doing very well here. I'm actually not enjoying this. Nobody's clapping me. Nobody's cheering anymore. Nobody's patting me on the back. You've got to remember that the people who often patted you on the back had a closed knife in their hand at the same time. And as many of those who have been in politics will know, the clap on the back by the person who tells you that you've just made a great speech when you know that they weren't in the room and they were doing something else is a reminder of the falseness that surrounds us, the theatre that surrounds us as well. Getting that balance right, the determination to be there, to change the world, to make a difference, but also remembering that the water that you pull your hand out is the measure of the amount you'll be missed is the balance we've got to try and achieve. Thanks for writing this, Jane. I hope people will read it, reflect on it, and perhaps act on it as well. Thanks very much.